All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of Inside BBI with John and Eric. I'm John McDevitt, of course, and with me, as always, senior editor of Big Blue Interactive, Mr. Eric Kennedy. Eric, here we are. We are almost at the beginning of the week for the first game of the season. But tonight, we've kind of got something where we're going to be looking a little bit ahead.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be something that the Giants fans are going to be doing a lot this year. Some fans aren't going to be crazy about this, but I have noticed already on BBI that there's one eye on the season, and there's one on the Giant season, and there's one eye on sort of what's happening in the college ranks, especially at quarterback and a few other positions. So I know some fans aren't going to like that because they're, big Daniel Jones backers, but I think we all kind of have to have an insurance policy ready, and I think the Giants are too. So I think having Colin on is great because we've already had a lot of requests from fans who say, I haven't been really following what's going on in college. Who should I be watching this year? And it's great to have Colin come on and discuss that, I think.
Well, then with that, we will introduce the third member of the episode tonight, Colin Lindsay of the GBN Report, the Great Blue North Report. And Colin, first off, welcome. And it's been a long time. We've done draft shows together before in the past, and I know you know Eric. So give folks a little bit of a background on yourself and how GBN came about, and kind of let folks know a little bit about what got you into this.
Yeah, well, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. As we were saying, we're working it up. It's kind of like old home week. John and I did a show a few years back, and Eric and I go back into the previous century almost. So yeah, no, people are going to know I'm from Canada actually. Best draft site in Canada, I believe, because I believe we're the only one that I'm aware of. And I started watching football, quite honestly, back in 1958. The NFL championship game, Colts and the Giants, was really when the NFL got kicked off. I was living in a little town in the eastern townships of Quebec, a few miles north of New York. Everybody in that town hated the Giants. They were all watching the Colts, cheering for the Colts. Being a kind of guy who liked to fit in, I cheered for the Giants. Been doing it ever since. Last game I missed, I believe, was in 1978. I've been at it for a while. And I started following the draft in the 1970s. And again, for those of you, for those of the listeners who are not, don't go back that far, there really wasn't very much on the draft in those days. And if you wanted to follow it, you had to pretty much make your own lists, which is what I did, and did it pretty much through the 80s. And then in the 90s, I was maybe not quite an original member of the BBI, but in fact, I was there, Eric, when it was the the homepage, whatever you
Yeah,
call
exactly. Well, if you go back that far, then you've been around since almost the beginning. Yeah.
I've been around for quite a while, and I started the Great Blue North really as a kind of a compliment to the to BBI. I kind of ended up being the draft guy with BBI in those days, and found myself answering the question Eric just mentioned. Who should I watch this weekend? And I was writing the same thing up every week, and said, well, why don't I just kind of post this stuff once, and people can read it there. Very quickly after I started it, I found people were coming from every team in the league, and so it's kind of gone league wide. But I am still first and foremost at heart a Giants fan, and sometimes a little bit hard to with the Giants in particular, when you're trying to do the analysis, is to separate the fan and the analyst. But I wouldn't give back any of the years that I've had with the Giants.
So I know Eric, you wanted to kind of touch on a little bit with Colin and kind of his thought process as we were talking about.
Yeah, Colin comes on every year and answers questions from fans on the site, which is fantastic. So we right about, I would say, early April, he comes on, and we have about a 1 to 2 hour session where he answers questions. But leading up to that, he always he's involved in the site by posting and responding, especially when he sees something interesting on the draft. And one thing I've noticed every year for the last few years is he will get on a thread about draft prospects when we're saying we need this, we need that, we need this, and he sort of says, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, guys, back up!" And there's a different way. This is not the way to look at the draft. There are different ways to look at the draft and team building, especially in this era. And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think there are positions that has. I mean, like teams have more intrinsic value for a franchise when you're building a team. So I just know that a lot of times when I've read his posts, he's caused me to stop and reflect on maybe I'm looking at the draft in the wrong manner. And I just thought before we get into this, it would be good for him to sort of his worldview on basically on how he approaches the draft.
Yeah, well, it's certainly an interesting question. The draft, I think, really has changed. Particularly since we got free agency and the salary cap. I actually believe it pains me to say this, but even though it's now this great massive 3-day event. TV event, it's almost been devalued since all that happened. So many of your players, even if you're able to draft a guy, you're only going to have him for 4 years, kind of a thing. If he's any good, he's going to be too expensive to keep, and he moves on, kind of a thing. So, and I think one of the differences I have with a lot of people anyway is the sense that a lot of people look at the draft and team building, and we got to fill holes here. You look around the league, the really good teams, they're not necessarily the teams that have the fewest holes. In my view, they're the teams that have the most impact players at the impactful positions. One of the things I've argued, during that last decade, which wasn't very good, let's be honest, I never got the sense that it was because the offensive line was bad. We just didn't have any impact players at all. Maybe Odell, maybe JPP, although he was only playing with one hand. We just didn't have any players who could make plays and change games. And in my view, in this day and age, that what you're getting is that teams are looking at the positions that do win games. In the National Football League, you win championships either because you throw the ball really well, or you can disrupt the other team's passing game. And the sense you get is that teams more and more are looking to find players at the positions that do impact the passing game, on offense, quarterbacks, receivers, offensive tackles, on defense, guys that can rush the passer, and then coverage people. And maybe use the later round draft picks to get your the other positions. The other thing that I really am starting to come to believe is that the draft is a very inefficient way to fill holes. You even look at a guy like Evan Neal. And I don't necessarily think he was, there to fill a hole, but he's 7th player picked, but the likelihood that the player picked 7th overall is going to be a successful player is only around 50%. And of course, as you get farther on down the draft, those numbers go way down. That's just not a very efficient way. If I need a guy to play there. I think you're far better off going out, getting a free agent, not necessarily somebody who you got to pay a lot of money to, but somebody who, knows how to play the position, and then use your draft picks, especially the early ones, to get players who are potential impact players and give them a little bit of time to develop and stuff like that. But the other thing, with the draft is that, the probability that guys are going to be good players, it really isn't very high. You get into this, even the 3rd round, the likelihood a guy's going to be a good player is about 25%. So you don't want to be, trying to fill a hole with a 3rd rounder, kind of a thing.
Right.
If this guy turns out to be a good player, great. But you can't start out with that kind of mindset anyway.
I thought, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think where I first started to see the way you viewed that, and you did an excellent job of basically explaining where you're coming from. I think there have been comments in the past where people have said on the site, don't draft a wide receiver, draft another position. We have holes here. And you've already addressed that it's not really filling holes per se, but getting impact players. And I think you've argued for a while that wide receiver is definitely an impact position and therefore don't automatically discount it. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you've come on and you've said that to that effect. Like, I think Cincinnati is a good example of that, where they have, as soon as they got the quarterback and got the wide receiver, it seemed like they changed their fortunes overnight. If those two players are not on, Burrow and Chase are not on that team, we're talking a different animal, and I think that's where you're basically coming from. So I just think it's an interesting way to look at it, because I do think we all fall victim of, we have a hole here, we have a hole here, we have a hole here, and we got to fill it, and we're going to use the draft to fill those holes. And your Evan Neal example is great too, because if we had maybe taken that wide receiver that the Jets took with Wilson, that would have been a better value for us in terms of impact, certainly based on what Evan's done. But I argued at the time that right tackle probably wasn't, because that's where we're going to play him. Right tackle might not have been the best value pick for a seventh overall pick.
Right.
That you might want to get more impact. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I do find it useful when you come on and you remind people of that.
Yeah, no, it's kind of interesting. One of the things that I tell people is, when you're analyzing the draft, don't do it in hindsight, because it's so easy.
Yeah.
No,
Right.
Evan Neal was a perfectly good pick at that point in time. The interesting thing is that that had the Giants taken a draft, a wide receiver, I'm sorry, it would have been the kid who went to Atlanta, Drake London. Not the guy who went to the Jets. And I don't think at this point in time anybody was thinking that the Jets kid was worth a top 10 pick at that point in time. He was certainly a value pick at that point in time. So I know, to go back to your original point, one of the things that does drive me crazy when I'm talking to my Giant friends is, they'll say, we can't afford to have no sneaking impact player. We got too many holes to fill. I'm thinking, use your draft to get your impact players, because you can't get them anywhere else. If every once in a while somebody comes up in free agency, but it's going to cost you so darn much,
Right.
it's really not worth it. And fill your holes with those free agents that could come in and maybe not be great, but at least they're not going to beat you.
Right. Before we go on and get deeper into the actual prospects and stuff, I want to ask one thing. You just mentioned something, and then I have another piece that I want to add to it. The change in the draft, how it's changed over the years. It's become kind of an event. And with free agency, with other stuff, you feel it's been a little bit devalued. On the other side of the coin, prior to the NFL side of it, how has the NIL affected the way the draft is now, and how you're looking at some players? Because are some of the juniors deciding, I'm getting paid, maybe I don't take that second, third round, I'll just stay in school another year and get paid and then worry about where I'm drafted later?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's going to be a possibility. Again, not a whole lot of those kids. You make an NFL roster and you're making $1 million. Not that many are making it, but certainly you get the sense maybe 5 years ago, for the kids going into college, it was a race to get to your third year.
Right.
And anybody who was anybody got to their third year and came to the NFL. Now what we're finding is that the really, really top prospects, the guys who are going to go in the first round, are coming out as they used to. But as you get farther and farther on down the draft, you're not finding as many third year kids who are coming out. They're staying in school because they can make some money. And for most of them, it's worth their while. If you're a fourth rounder, go back, try and improve your grade, maybe come back as a second or third rounder kind of a thing, and get a better contract. But it's impacting the draft, not so much at the top. I don't think it's a huge deal, but certainly in terms of depth, there's probably going to be an effect as we go down the road.
So let's kind of delve now kind of into prospects and things like that. But before 25, you and I were talking beforehand, so I just wanted to bring it up. In the fall last year, so the 24 prospects in the fall, you had boards kind of preliminarily set up, and you always say, this is going to change. This is going to change, but this is where it's at. How different was it in the fall to when we got around to draft time? Just let's use the quarterbacks. How much changed from the fall to the time the draft rolled around?
Well, for 2024, there wasn't a ton of change. The top 10 guys at this time last year were pretty much the top 10 guys this year. I mean, Caleb Williams, Drake May. Obviously, there was some movement there. Shadeur Sanders was being talked about as a top 10 guy. Didn't come out. Some other guys didn't come out. But this last year, there wasn't a lot of change. It stayed pretty standard, far less so than in past years. I know we do a mock draft mostly as a joke, but it's amazing how people take it seriously after the draft. Then the day after we put out a mock draft, and I can't believe how many people send in. I can't believe that the Buckaroos you haven't taken a tight end. What are you smoking over there? Calm down, people. It's a year away. But often, year to year, it's kind of like we'll get about half of them right in that mock draft. Probably about now we might get 18 to 20 right. And again, there's an awful lot of change that's going to happen over the year. But certainly last year, it really did. You got the sense that the top of the board was, if not totally set, was pretty set. And right now, you have a very good looking top of the board for 2025. Again, there's going to be a lot of change there. You don't have the same situation with the quarterbacks as being quite as highly ranked. I mean, you don't have a Caleb Williams there. You don't really have a Drake May type of player, but there's some really talented players coming down the tubes.
So real quick before we do 25, just back to 24. There's a lot of people on BBI, and for those we've been told, I got to make sure that's bigblueinteractive.com. Make sure that if you're not there, go there. Please check it out. But on BBI, it was draft a quarterback no matter what at 6. If the guy that you wanted went 1, 2, and 3, we knew they liked Williams. They obviously liked Daniels. They made that comment when they asked Dayball, would you trade up? And he goes, for Daniels? Absolutely. And then we knew they were interested in May. But the thought is from everyone else, well, when we got to 6, we should have gone after either Penix, Nix, or McCarthy. Do you agree with that statement with some of the fans where they were like, we should have just taken a quarterback no matter what in the first round? Or did the Giants play it right and take the best player once it got to 6 when the quarterback they wanted clearly was gone?
We'll have to wait and see. I like what they did. Obviously, I think had Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels been there, even Drake May, who were elite quarterbacks, they would have done that in a heartbeat. I like what they did because, as we were saying just a little while ago, with the wide receivers, every really good team in the National Football League has a really good wide receiver, and Malik Neighbors has that potential to be one of those guys. And like quarterbacks, they're hard to find that type of guy. And I think you said, okay, we know we got an elite quarterback. Let's go that way. And my guess is that what they did is that you put a grade on those second tier guys. Say it was 75. You can look at past drafts, see what the probability that a guy with that kind of grade turns out to be a really good player, even a better player than Daniel Jones. And my guess is the odds weren't all that high. They may also have looked at next year's draft and said, if we need to get a quarterback, there are a number of guys who are going to be available next year with the same grade. And I know it's a minority opinion, and maybe I shouldn't say it, but I think they feel a lot better about Daniel Jones than the vast majority of fans. One of the things that I've been sort of saying is that you're not. They didn't keep Daniel Jones because of anything he's done in the past or hasn't done. I think they feel like he's got a certain tool set there. There's obviously some things he's got to prove yet, but the tool set is there. Let's see what he's got in, what he can do with a much better supporting cast around him. And you know, in the end, they felt, I think, that they have a better team with Daniel Jones at quarterback, throwing to a guy like Malik Neighbors, than maybe one of these rookie quarterbacks throwing still to Darius Slayton and people like that. You know, in the end, I was a little bit surprised that they didn't take a quarterback. Quarterbacks are hard to find, and you never know exactly, which one's going to evolve. But at the same time, I mean, you can kind of understand, the thinking was here. And as I say, there's a lot of good quarterbacks coming out next year. So, if it comes to it, it'll be a year later, but the possibilities are there.
Were you surprised that, I should preface this, we that a scuttlebutt was that there were a number of quarterback hungry teams that were looking at the second tier of quarterbacks in that draft. So I think we were starting to get a sense or a feel that Nix and Penix and McCarthy were going to go earlier than maybe people felt if they were asked that same question back in March. Taking those quarterback hungry teams out of the picture in terms of their desperation for having a quarterback. Did you have those three ranked highly, or did you think they went a little higher than they should have gone? The Penixes, the Nixes, and the McCarthys. Did that on your board? Was that something that you thought, or did they go where you thought they should have?
Yeah, it's so hard with quarterbacks and ranking them. One of the things we always say is, when it comes to quarterbacks in the draft, you kind of throw the board out. I was certainly stunned that Penix was the first one of those guys taken, and then he went to Atlanta. A little bit surprised that I should revise that. I mean, I wasn't surprised that McCarthy didn't go quite as highly as he was being talked about. I just felt that there were some holes in his game, and to me, you just worry about how much was it JJ McCarthy and how was it the fact that he played on such a really, really good team.
Yeah.
But Nick's going where we really like Nick's, by the way. Would not have been unhappy had the Giants taken him there. I'm not sure I would have been real thrilled had they taken the other two guys. But they probably went earlier than people thought, but not a whole lot earlier. And I don't think, other than Denver taking Knicks and Minnesota getting McCarthy, pretty much expected a little bit of a shock that Penix went a little bit higher. But that's what quarterbacks are about. As I say, you need a quarterback. You like one, you take them, and you move on.
Yeah, I will say, for the fact that Atlanta did it after spending so much money on Cousins, it's an odd thing to go, we're going to go sign a free agent quarterback and then we'll draft a quarterback in the first round. And I know some people will say, well, no, you got to plan for the future. I get that, but they signed Cousins because their future is now. Why you didn't load up with another player that could help you make that run? You've got playmakers already on that team. Anyway, this isn't an Atlanta show, but that was the weird part about that. The way they went about and making that choice. But I always thought, for me, Penix was the one that least fit what Daboll would want to do based on some of his past history. And then I thought, once you got past May, and Eric can attest to this, I was all in for May. If we spent a bunch to get May, I would have been fine with that. We didn't get him, so I was okay with Neighbors. But anyone else, like you said, you're now playing with the same weapons we had the year before, with a guy who hasn't proven anything in the NFL, and you're hoping that that'll be better. So it worked out the way it worked out ultimately.
Well, we'll see down the road. As I say, you kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of another. They made that choice. We'll see how it works out. I personally am a lot more optimistic about this season than I think a lot of people. And you're not allowed to brag up here in Canada, but before the 2000, It's true. Before the 2022 season, when people were predicting, 4 or 5 wins, I sort of said, this is, don't be surprised if the Giants, at least compete for a playoff spot. I also thought last year that, expected there would be a bit of a drop off, maybe not quite as much as we got, because just what happens to teams that make a big jump from year to year, that they tend to be a little overconfident and maybe don't work quite as hard at training camp, and you do have that drop off. But I'm looking at a team and I'll throw in the caveat there that it really depends on Daniel Jones being around. But you look back at the last 45 games that he has started, and the Giants are 21-23, which is not bad given what the talent is around him. And you're adding a Malik Neighbors and a Brian Burns, who I think were between them are the top 2 impact players that any team in the league acquired. Also hope that the offensive line is finally going to be at least competent. Again, I think we still have some holes there and some issues that ways to go yet. But my personal feeling is, as long as Daniel Jones stays healthy, this team is 8 to 10 win type team, and that's going to put you at least in competition for the playoff spot. And if Malik Neighbors is as good as we're kind of hoping, combine him with a Wan'Dale Robinson and Slayton and Hyatt, who can run like the wind. I mean, you put those 4 guys out in a 400-meter relay, and you got a world-class relay team. And the Giants have never ever had that kind of speed at wide receiver. And you put Burns together with Dex Lawrence and Tebow, you have the potential for a pretty darn disruptive pass rush. And those are the 2 basic elements to winning in the National Football League. Still got to do it on the field. And obviously Daniel Jones has got to stay healthy, because I think if we had to go with Locke and DeVito for any period of time, I step back and withdraw my my estimate. In fact, I would suspect that if something did happen to Jones that he couldn't play, that Joe Shane would be on the phone to somebody, Pittsburgh, is Justin Fields available, or somebody like that. Go out and get a veteran who can kind of fill in, because Drew Lock is a placeholder, and Tommy DeVito is still a undrafted second-year guy who doesn't turn the ball over, but isn't going to make a whole lot of plays. So anyway, we'll see how it goes. I'm looking forward to the season, even if it goes south. I really think that this team is getting better. And as somebody who went through the 1970s, and actually enjoyed most of it. It was I was getting into the draft at that point in time. Okay, well, what do we need to get out of this hole? It's a process. It takes a little while. I tell people who, God damn it all, Jay Shane's been here for 3 years now. We should be good. In George Young's first 5 years, the Giants were something like 26-46. In his 5th year, they were 3-12-1. It takes a little bit of time, but I really get the sense that we're going in the right direction. We're starting to get that core of good young impact players, and as long as they can stay healthy, I think we're kind of coming out of that bad stretch, which every team does in the National Football League at one point or another.
I think a lot of fans romanticize the past a little bit too. If you go back and look at those George Young drafts in the 80s, and when they were 12 rounds, there are some really good picks there, but there are guys that were not good. And it's I hate to use the word crapshoot. I like to sort of use educated gambling a little bit. You send your scouts out and you do the best you can do, but it's not a sure thing. So when I'm glad you brought up earlier when you said the percentages on even the high round draft picks, it's not what people think it is. Again, you do all the work that you can do, and you rely on your scouting staff, and hopefully you have a good team. But a lot of these guys year after year, and it's not just the Giants, it's every team in the league. You'd be amazed. I think it just came out the other day. The Redskins for 2023, they've cut 5 of their 7 draft picks already
Right.
for the 2020. And I'm sure some of them ended up on the practice squad. But the draft isn't what it is. So when I see comments like, "Oh, geez, we just cut our 4th round or 5th round draft pick 3 years after we drafted him," that's not atypical. You know, but I think people always think when you draft, you have to have a perfect batting average on draft picks.
Yeah, there is this sense that, that somehow, your general manager, if he's any good, he can tell who the good players are going to be and who the busts are going to be. One of the things I tell people is that when it comes to the draft, nobody knows. Nobody knows.
Right.
And what it really means is nobody in the National Football League can tell you which player or if a player is going to be a good player or not a good player. What they can tell you, and it's what people like myself and Dave Syverston and others in this business do, is what we can do is we can tell you, which player has the best likelihood of being a good player.
Right.
And that's a whole lot different than being able to pick and choose. I mean, again, you look at the history of this thing. Tom Brady, greatest player of all time, was a afterthought in the 6th round, and you can go on and find like that. And again, kind of pains me to say it as a guy who's done this for years. The draft is, somebody asked me, is it luck or talent? It's 98% luck, and the other 2% is chance. It really boils down to what's available. You can't draft a Lawrence Taylor if Lawrence Taylor is not there, and if the guys are there when you pick them and they come in and they stay healthy, you'll have a good run. But it is a crapshoot, and it's a lottery. And again, people will tell me, "Yeah, I know, I understand that, but boy, did we ever screw that pick."
Yeah.
I tend to joke too that everything I learned about the draft, I learned playing poker. There are a lot of similarities there. Again, you're really playing the odds and things of that nature, rather than dealing with certainties. So anyway, it makes it fun, makes it interesting, and we should carry on.
Yeah, I will say the few times that you can clearly say that was a wrong way to go is when you draft a guy, you have a system that plays a certain way, and you draft a guy who clearly isn't a player to play in that system, and you try to force him to be something he's not. And I bring this up often, and Eric's going to laugh when I say his name again, but the Giants drafted Clint Sintum and then tried to play him as a 4-3 outside linebacker. He was not a 4-3 outside. He basically just floundered out there until he moved on. So, but other than that, people forget a lot of it is what you end up being around. If you go and like the offensive line, with people complain about the Giants, well, they did this, and they say, "Oh, you let Feliciano go, and look what he's doing with San Francisco." Well, I'm like, well, first off, Feliciano is a very limited player. But when you surround him with 4 guys that are unbelievably limited or probably shouldn't even be on a roster, every little piece of his game is exposed. But you surround him with Trent Williams, and they had McGlinchey at one point, and I think they've got Boone from Notre Dame at guard. I mean, when you put those guys, you play them, that's a whole different story where his limitations are now hidden. So it's really a matter sometimes of the system you end up in. Like you said, not everybody's an LT who becomes his own thing. He changes everything. Others, you're kind of relying on, if I'm with a bunch of bad people, 2 guys can take me out of a game and the rest of the guys aren't going to do anything. So sometimes it's just the system you end up in.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned Clint Sintum, because I remember the pick being made at the time and kind of scratching my head and saying to myself, if the Giants use this guy as a pass rush specialist, because that's what he was. He was a thick linebacker, low built, not very agile, not very quick, but he was powerful and strong, and could dominate going forward. If they're picking him to be a pass rush specialist on 3rd down, pure genius. If they're picking him to turn into a linebacker, I don't understand it. And of course, they used him at linebacker.
Right. That's exactly what they did.
He was under the league in short order. So yeah, that was a strange one. But one of the frustrating things that I experienced over the last decade was with the Giants. We talk about the poor drafting. Year in and year out, as the Giants made their picks, I would be saying to myself, "Nice pick, good pick, nice player. That's an interesting pick, good pick." And yet, 2 years later, they're pretty much all out of the league. And I remember the 2016 draft. I believe that was the year, the Eli Apple draft.
Oh.
Giants only had six picks that year. Excuse me. But all six guys we felt like had a chance to be a starter. And as it turned out, 5 of the 6 actually did start at one point in time. But of those 6 guys, Sterling Shepard was the only one who had any kind of a career with the Giants, and even his career was really limited by his injuries. So it sometimes it works for you and sometimes it doesn't.
I want to make a recommendation. We have Colin come back on sometime and just do a show dedicated to previous Giant drafts. I think that would be fascinating, both the good and the bad.
Right.
We could go on and on about this because there are players that I thought for sure were going to be fantastic for us, and they changed the way I viewed the entire draft. Derek Brown was one of them. That he was a sure thing that they said, he was going to be the next Mark Bavaro.
Right.
That we could go through that. I think it would be fascinating just to do a show going, not just the old drafts too, but some of the more recent ones for the younger fans. I think it'd be interesting to go through those.
Yeah, it would. Yeah, no, thinking about that, a couple of years, somebody asked me the other day, I really was excited about getting Ruben Randall in the second round of whatever draft that was. And he showed flashes over the years, but he just never, took that next step up. And it's the way just the way the draft goes, unfortunately.
Well, speaking of the draft, we might as well start taking a look at some of the prospects here for 25 because everybody is kind of interested. Yeah. So let's not beat around the bush. Let's start with the position group that I think that folks want to hear about the most. The quarterback group we've kind of already somewhat talked about, but let's take a deeper look at it. I was looking at some of what you have on the site, which is gbnreport.com. If you haven't, please go there, check it out.
Yeah, can I just jump in?
Please.
People should get on his site. It's fantastic when you go to the big board. So the one thing I love about Colin's site is he always has, it's not one of these deals where someone's not ready to stick their neck out and sort of put these guys in order. I'm sure he goes back and moves people around. But what I love about his site is I can go to his site and look at the big board and then break it down by position, how he has these guys ranked. So before we came on, I've got his site open right now so I can look at all the names right now. So I just wanted to throw that out there too.
Absolutely. And I will have the link in the description for those who haven't been there. The link will be there for you to get to the site. So when I was looking at the quarterback group, you mentioned already, it might not be as top heavy as 24, but it potentially is deeper. So I want your thoughts on, we've got, the Beck and the Sanders and those guys, and we want to talk about them, but some of the other guys like Drew Allar all of a sudden shows a little bit. Cam Ward, who I'm interested in out of Miami, shows a little bit. And then I thought, is it Wegman with Texas A&M? He struggled a little bit.
He struggled a little bit. He's a third-year guy who's had some injuries. I was even reluctant to put him on our board because I don't think he's going to come out. I don't think he's that high a draft pick. He's got a lot to prove, and he certainly struggled a little bit against Notre Dame last night. So a lot of NFL teams seem to like him as maybe the fourth guy, even behind the top 3. Cam Ward, we've liked him since he was down at that crazy place, Incarnate Ward. He was a terrific player at the FCS level. He's a really good athlete. He's got a really wonky delivery there. He's throwing sidearm and 3/4 arm, but he's a very athletic guy. Seems very poised and calm in the pocket, and not the kind of guy I don't think you're going to, at this point in time, say Daniel Jones, you're out the door, and Cam Ward, here's the ball. You're more a guy I think you're going to take maybe in the late first, early second round, and bring him in, see if he can play, and if he can, then you move on to him. Then you have guys like Beck and Shadeur Sanders, maybe even Quinn Ewers, if he has a good year this year, would be the kind of guys you'd say, okay, we need a quarterback. He's it. Come on in here. But there's a lot of guys. Yes, Drew Alar is a big, tall guy, strong armed. Never did much with that Penn State offense, which maybe in part just the design of that offense. But he had a terrific game yesterday against West Virginia. Threw the ball down the field, and they finally scored some points there. But yes, there are a lot of really good second tier quarterbacks. John mentioned some. We really like Jackson Dart of Mississippi. Kind of if you're looking for a guy to make the Jaden Daniels kind of move, he's a really interesting guy in that regard. And I also mentioned just in passing that if anybody bets a few shekels out there and wants to put a bit of money on a dark horse national championship team, you might want to take a look at Mississippi. That's a really talented football team they have there, and Dart is a really good quarterback. And you have a bunch of other guys rising at Utah. Riley Leonard didn't have a great game last night either for Notre Dame. But this time last year, at least early in the season, people were talking about him as a potential, late first rounder, and there are quite a number of guys that have the potential to be in that late first, early second round group. And I thought this year, a little bit surprised the Giants didn't take a draft pick after, even though they didn't take one in the first round. I was kind of thought, we'd take a rattler in the second, or have somebody. I suspect it was they didn't want to have somebody sitting on the sidelines that every time Jones, the Giants went 3 and out, started screaming, we want rattler, kind of a thing. I would suspect next year, even if Daniel Jones sticks around, that you start looking at it, and you don't take somebody in the first round, but I would really start thinking you're going to look at people in the second, third round, kind of a thing, and bring them in as a potential future guy down the road.
Yeah, because I think the issue with Jones right now is not just does he take the next step, but there are the injury concerns there as well. And the way I'm looking at this draft, and tell me if I'm crazy with the quarterback position, is this. I agree with you, Colin. John and I are going to talk about this more when we do our season preview. There's a plug there, guys.
Nice.
I think the Giants are going to be hovering around that 500 mark, give or take 2 games in either direction. So if Beck is clearly a top 3 quarterback in this draft, they're not going to have a shot at them. So the way I'm looking at this draft with the quarterbacks, worst case scenario for Daniel Jones, he gets hurt again, and or he just isn't what they want. And I think this is kind of what John was getting at a little bit too. I'm hoping that there's a number of quarterbacks that are going to go that are clearly not top tier, but are interesting enough that will justify a mid to late first round grade. And that's where Daboll, if you saw him in Hard Knocks, the way he grilled the quarterbacks at the combine, he's obviously looking for very bright guys that can process information very quickly. That maybe they find someone that they have ranked higher than anybody else or other teams do, and maybe they can move up a little bit to get that guy maybe at 12 or 10 or 8. But I don't think unless we have a devastating season, they're not going to be in the top 5 picking. So we've got to focus on those quarterbacks sort of that are you fall in love with because the coaching staff and the general manager really find an attribute that they like. If they feel good about that quarterback. Is that a silly way to look at this class, or do you have another view on that?
No, I think that's exactly the way you want to look at it. And this is the year to be looking at it that way, because again, the top two guys are not as solid as the guys this year. They could even move farther on down in the and there's just a lot of guys in who are going to be in that late first, early second, mid second round, who are good college players with some pro potential. And if there's one guy you like there, you bring in, like Philadelphia did with Jalen Hurts when they picked him in the second round.
Yeah.
They didn't pick him because they thought he was going to be the starter next year. He was a good college quarterback. Had some questions about his pro ability. You bring him in if he can play. Um, and as I say, with quarterbacks, you kind of throw that you're bored out. You get a shot at a guy you like, you take him. And as I say, I thought this was a kind of an odd year with Jones and everything else that was going on, and maybe they just opted to do something else. But next year, it is a good year if that's the way they want to go. And I would guess, even if Jones goes out and leads the Giants to the playoffs and a playoff win, and he's still around, you go that way anyway.
Right.
And get your back up that way, so you don't have to live with the Drew Locks of this world, because he is Drew Lock, and you're not going to win many games. You're not going to win many games with him if he's got to go for an extended period of time. But yeah, it's a good year to be looking for quarterbacks the way the Giants are looking for them.
Do you have any major concerns with Sanders and the entourage that obviously will follow him to the NFL, and kind of maybe that influence, which it seems like some people aren't overly thrilled with Primetime's, possible influence and or interference in what might happen with his son? I don't know if I think
I think he
Colin.
froze.
Yes.
Oh, there we go.
And I'll leave it at that. Yeah, it's with Sanders and do
We're getting you breaking up a little bit.
really kind of shy away from it. He's a kid.
Yeah, I would think
He's yes. What
I think we'll wait. I'm sure he's buffering just a little bit, but yeah, the Sanders thing to me, he's a unique one. You're going to have some people that are going to be really just all in on the hype, and I worry about what comes with him, and how much of a distraction that could be.
Should we pause and have him come back on?
Yeah, it's going to be a really unique situation with him. He's a very talented, reads the field very accurate, just and be a tough because that's not a very good team out. A team saying, yeah, we'll take him, kind of a thing, because they like to do that. He might not be a great fit in New York, but at the same time, if you got a shot at him, and you might be tempted to take it and move on. I mean, he's a smart kid, and at some point in time, he does have to go up and move on. So, but it is going to be a factor, absolutely, no question.
And then the last one that I'll throw in there, because Dave Sy brought up Jalen Milroe as his guy to really keep an eye on, that might be being undervalued at the moment.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's a guy who's a really interesting guy in terms of tools. You kind of think of him maybe along the lines of a Josh Allen. He's not the best passer in the world, but he's a terrific athlete. Is a big guy, can break tackles in the open field. He's got the speed to make big gains. He's not a real polished pocket passer. Not the most accurate guy, and his technique is kind of all over the place, but a guy with a lot of upside, and another guy that you would put in that mix as being a potential riser along with the Jackson Dart, that if he has that kind of year. He certainly had a great start yesterday. Let's see how he does against some other teams. But as I say, there's a lot of quarterbacks this year, in part because so many went back.
Right.
A bunch of those guys were expected to come out. So many of them went back, there's just a lot of them there, and it's going to be fun to watch and see how they develop. And I don't know, I heard that Joe Shane was all over the country over the weekend. He was he was in Atlanta watching that game. He was in at Texas A&M. I'm not sure how he got from one game to the other. I mean, the Notre Dame game, the Georgia game would have ended at 3:30, and the Texas game ended at 7:30. It's a flying time of almost 2.5 hours at the worst. And he was there at 7 o'clock talking to the Notre Dame coach. Not sure how he did that, but good for him. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting year. It's a good year at quarterbacks for a team that is picking like the Giants are.
Well, that's good to hear. Because I think that's what they're going to have to do, is they're going to have to find their favorite flavor. And it's going to be interesting, like you just mentioned, sort of track where the senior level personnel on the Giants are, which games they're watching. For better or worse, they kind of wear their interest on their sleeves. The 30 visits have been very telling. Where they travel has been very telling. So I think, they're obviously, each team, it's not just quarterback that they're looking at, but it's fun to want. It's fun to sort of put where he's going, with the players are on the roster, and try to figure out who they're really trying to get eyes on at that level. When the general manager's doing it, it tells you that there's special interest, I think, there.
Yeah, and also, tell people they'll say, well, he could be looking at some of those offensive guards. General managers don't go on the road,
right.
At this point in time, to look at offensive guards who they take in the third round. He's going to look at Carson Beck. He might be taking a long look at Michael Williams, who's a terrific defensive end prospect with Georgia. But that's who we went to see. Plus, these guys are all part of a club, and they all know each other. And for Joe Shane, he's probably saying to himself, "This is going to be one of the few weekends I can really get away. We're not playing; it's open. I'll go and see as many games as I can." I don't think you saw him on the sideline taking notes and stuff like that. It's showing the flag. It's seeing a guy. He gets up to Carson Beck there, and you can watch. How's the ball come out of his hand? What's his footwork like, that kind of thing, and get a sense and a feel like that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, general managers don't go to places where they're not looking at a particular player, so it kind of gives it away. But unless you're Pittsburgh, and the interesting thing with Pittsburgh is they go everywhere. Those two guys. Most teams do it the same way. So it's not like the Giants are giving away any secrets that nobody else is giving away.
It's interesting on the games they picked, though. So the second game being Notre Dame, Texas A&M. And the question then is, well, if Shane is looking at quarterbacks, I can't imagine that the Notre Dame, Texas A&M game was one that he just was like, I got to go to that one to see those guys. They're borderline second, third, maybe first, later, depending on what happens. And God forbid we can't really draft another guy that was playing at Duke at quarterback. But there are some other players on Notre Dame on the defensive side of the ball. You got Morrison at quarterback, and then you have Howard Cross's son on the defensive line, who may not be a first-round guy. He might be a first-round guy, but he's certainly a guy that people are looking at, and he kind of have a little bit of the, he's family, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, part of it too is for these guys is you just you're meeting people, you're showing the flag. Maybe Notre Dame doesn't have a whole lot of people this year. Texas A&M doesn't really have anybody, that a general manager would be going to see. But you meet the people, and you build a relationship with them there. Certainly, one of the things, if the Giants don't go quarterback in the first round next April, you would have to think either maybe defensive tackle or somebody who would fit in that bill, or a cornerback, would be a good player. And certainly Ben Morrison of Notre Dame is one of the better ones out there. not quite sure where Howard Cross Jr. fits. He's a really good college player, but he's a really odd size. He's about 6 feet, only about 6 feet. He's 280 pounds. He's a defensive tackle in college. Um, He'd be an interesting kid and as a later round guy that you bring in to maybe play as one of your 3-4 defensive ends who you can kick inside to rush the passer on passing downs. I can't imagine that he would have gone across the country to see a player like that. But certainly Ben Morrison is an interesting player.
Right.
Again, my guess is that was more of a drop in and get to know people, establish a relationship rather than when you go to a place like Georgia. He also, I believe, went to the Colorado game earlier last week. So, he's looking at real players there, but I'm not quite sure he would have been looking at anybody seriously at for a general manager at Texas A&M Notre Dame.
Yeah, I want to hit on those two positions. I want to finish up with quarterback, but I want to hit on those two positions that you just mentioned because that's where I think the Giants are looking is corner and defensive tackle. I think they need another good draft on defense. But before John finishes up with his quarterback question, we know things are going to change between now and the end of the season. So everyone listening should understand that too. So who's the top prospect now is not going to be who the top prospects are going to be in December. Gun to your head right now, who are your 3 favorite quarterbacks right now as of today? Understanding that this can vastly change with a few months of college football.
Yeah, well, I say this with the caveat that nobody should really care who I like. Yeah, I'm just throwing.
That's why we're here, though.
Yeah. I tell you a little story. Way back in my first days here, we were the first website that picked out Achilles Smith way back whenever as a top 100 guy. We were the first guys that had him in the first round. We were the first guys that had him in the top 5. And of course, that's what happened to Achilles Smith.
Achilles Smith is my all-time personal bust because I had him as the best quarterback in that draft.
We saw him and he just threw darts. But whatever. His kid actually is playing at Oregon these days. He's not the starter, but time has moved on. So you never know. We really like Jackson Dart. And again, if you get a shot at Carson Beck, who's a really nice player. Let's see. I'd like to see him play against some tougher competition. Then he got this weekend against Clemson. Sorry, too bad for them. But he was just standing back there and throwing passes to pretty wide open guys without too much pressure. But he's a nice player, and if you were close enough and you could move up. One of the interesting things with this draft is, last year you had teams picking 1, 2, 3, and several behind us that really needed quarterbacks. There's a good chance that the teams picking early this year, it should be Carolina, probably New England, and some other teams who did take quarterbacks this year aren't going to be needing quarterbacks themselves. So you may see a real trade market going on, or if those guys aren't quite that highly rated, they could drop down a little bit. But as I say, we like Jackson Dart. Let's see how he does. The other guy that's really, really interesting here is Dylan Gabriel, who's now out at Oregon. He's been everywhere. He's not all that tall. He's only about 5'11", but he's a really nice passer. Kind of the favorite to win the Heisman Trophy, actually, because that's a pretty wide open offense they have out there. He's going to put up some terrific numbers this year. But he's a kind of an interesting kid too. You kind of think of a Russell Wilson type of guy who at that size sort of a thing. But he's going to be an interesting kid too.
It's way too early to predict anything. How many quarterbacks do you think by when we roll around to the draft, how many will actually go in the first round?
You're really putting them on the spot.
No, I know.
It's, given this class, I mean, you have 3 guys at least that are pretty solid there. I think you could see 5 or 6 go in the first round, and you could see pretty close to that number going, at least second day. you don't usually get a lot of quarterbacks taken in the second or third round. People either take them in the first round, and if you don't get one in the first round, we'll move on. But this guy, again, this is a different kind of a year at quarterback. But I think in the end, you'll probably get a similar kind of number that you get this year. Although my guess is they won't be going quite as high as you won't see 6 in the top 12, but you certainly could see 5 or 6 go by the end of the first round.
But you do see quarterbacks going in the second and the third round in this upcoming draft.
Yes, yeah, there's some really good quarterbacks out there. I mean, I got a list here of, I read out the names of, 10, 12 that are really, potentially good quarterbacks. Cam Rising of Utah and Will Howard now at Ohio State, who kind of buried in the program he was at last year. And you could kind of go on here for quite a little bit. There's a lot of quality quarterbacks out there this year.
Well, that's encouraging. That's encouraging. I think that fits where the Giants are right now.
Yeah, it'll be a really fun year watching college football. If you're a fan, I encourage people to watch it. It's a good, fun game.
One of the before we switch positions groups, though, one of the things you brought up just a minute ago, Colin, and you hinted at it, Eric, is that there are going to be teams with good records this year that are going to be missing quarterbacks when the season's over, potentially. Dallas is looking like they're heading to a separation with Prescott if they don't get that deal done. It doesn't sound like they're going to. Pittsburgh could have a decent year this year, and they're going to probably be needing a quarterback. They got 2 guys on basically 1-year deals. So you've got a couple of teams there. There's a couple of others that are, who knows what happens with the 49ers. Purdy's been the guy, but he's going to want a deal in the near future. And what if they do okay but not great? Do they go and want to try to find somebody just to backfill because they don't have the money to spend? There's going to be some teams potentially behind us that are going to be quarterback needy, where some of the ones in front of us, which was the opposite of our problem this year, we had a lot of teams in front of us that needed quarterbacks, and so did we, and that kind of left us kind of just hanging out there. It might be the other way around, that in front of us, there might be spots to make deals, but I still think we're going to be drafting a little lower than other people think. So I'll save that for the preview as well. So switching position groups then, you talked about it then, Eric mentioned it, the position groups that can make, plays happen, can change games, cornerback, defensive line, and it doesn't really matter which one we start with. Those are areas that clearly the Giants are going to be looking at, is at least in free agency, if not the draft, based on what we have right now.
Yes. Yeah, could jump in. Both interesting this year. This year's draft was weird in the sense that it was a totally offensive draft, at least at the top of the board.
Right.
What was it? Top 14, top 15 players, all offense. That's not going to happen in 2025. It is a very, very good year for defensive tackles.
Good.
You're going to have your shot. And again, it's going to depend on what the Giants, what kind of guy they want. Do they want just a big run stuffer type of guy to line up next to Dex Lawrence? And you have several guys in that group. Mason Graham, who's kind of being talked about as a top 10 guy. At Michigan, he's not all that big. He doesn't have the long arms, but he's 6'2", he's 320. He has an absolutely super motor, and a very good player there. You also have Deion Walker, who I think is a really, really interesting kid. He's 6'5", he's 340 pounds, runs really, really well. And he can rush the passer. Mason Graham could drop down a little bit because he's not a great pass rusher. But if you could get a Deion Walker, line him up next to a Dexter Lawrence, that would be a really interesting player. And then you go on down. If you're just looking for a run stuffing type of guy, there are going to be guys at defensive tackle you can get in the second round and in the third round, maybe even, that can come in and contribute. Maybe not going to be all-stars, but could be good, solid players. The other thing the Giants could be looking for here would be more of a 3-4 defensive end type of player who then they can kick into defensive tackle on third downs. And you have a guy like Nick Squirton of Texas A&M, almost looked like he got hurt last night, but but thankfully he's okay. He's 6'4", he's 280. Actually, played a linebacker at Purdue last year. I mean, he's that agile and athletic, really interesting prospect. And again, you've got guys at those positions that are going to be available, into the second round. And there are a lot of kids that can play defensive tackle in this draft.
Yeah, I think Hard Knocks gave us a little bit of a preview that before Brian Burns was an option, they're definitely looking at defensive tackle. And my guess is, and I think they've been pretty open about it, they want to rush 4 and they want to drop 7. And so what I will be looking for are defensive tackles who can get after the quarterback. Because I think if you can get a 4th guy that Dax is going to demand one-on-one. I mean, sorry, double team attention. Brian Burns and Thibodeau are going to challenge the outside. If they can get somebody scary good on the inside rushing the passer, who a guard can't handle one-on-one, then you're turning this defense into a whole different beast. So that's
Right.
what I'm going to be looking for are those. I would love to have another run stuffing defensive tackle, but I think they want somebody who's going to, I mean, if they can do both, that'd be the best of both worlds. But I really think they want somebody who's gonna challenge inside on the pass rush. So those are the guys I'm looking at.
Certainly in the first round, that's what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be excited about a Mason Graham there. He's a really good player. Doesn't have the long arms and isn't a great pass rusher. One other guy that I would mention is not getting a whole lot of attention right now, but his name is Jamari Caldwell, and he plays at Oregon, 6'1", 325. Very quick, very explosive, good pass rusher. He's a guy to keep an eye on. And if you're looking at a more of a 3-4 type guy, there's some guys that are again interesting there. Landon Jackson of Arkansas, more of a second round guy, but 6'6", 275 pounds. With some pass rush ability. Another kid at SMU who's really underrated. Elijah Roberts is his name. He's only about 275. But again, a really, really good pass rusher that you could kick inside. The other one I'd mention is another guy from Oregon, Jordan Birch. Didn't have a very good year last year at all. Didn't get some sacks, but he's a great big kid and would be another guy in that area. But certainly, it is the kind of position that, if you didn't, as I say, didn't get somebody in the first round, you're going to be able to get somebody in either the second round, maybe even the third round, who can come in and help you in that regard at that position.
So
let me just say, on the other hand, if you want a cornerback, and obviously that's to me, it's a one position that is a little sketchy right now. I think getting Adoree Jackson back is nice. Hopefully he can play like he did a couple of years ago.
right.
Because he was pretty good then. But there are some really, really good cornerbacks at the top of this board. We talked about Ben Morrison. You got Will Johnson at Michigan, who's just a terrific player. He's 6'2", 205 pounds. He hits like a safety, runs really, really well. You have Travis Hunter. We haven't mentioned him from Colorado. Yeah. I don't know what position he's going to play in the NFL. He's a All-American type cornerback. And a very good wide receiver. What are teams going to look at him? He's a better cornerback at wide receiver, but wide receivers is a more impactful position. They have a kid out at Arizona, Tacario Davis. He's 6'4". He's 195 pounds. He doesn't have super speed, but he's still a 4.5 guy. And, if you're a scout, you'd have to love to go out to Arizona where they have the McMillan receiver, who people are talking about as potentially, the first player picked overall, who's also 6'4", 6'5", and watch those two guys going at it in practice. It should be really kind of interesting. Again, Arizona kind of gets buried out there. And people really haven't seen him. They have a really interesting quarterback there too, by the name of Noah Fafita. Again, another one of these guys who's maybe 5'11" at the most, but he can really sling it. Third-year guy, probably not going to enter the draft, but kind of an interesting guy. But you have those four guys. You have some decent second-tier type guys. Denzel Burke of Ohio State. a lot of people thought would be a first rounder this year. He went back to school. Same with Jason Marshall of Florida. You got a kid at hard to know where some of these guys play. Jabbar Muhammad played at Oregon last year and is at Washington this year, or maybe the other way around. I'm not quite sure. But he's a real ball hawking cornerback. Again, another guy who's going to be there in the second round. But if you really want to fill that hole at cornerback, this is the kind of position where you really kind of want to do something in the first round.
Yeah.
You're going to get maybe in the second round, you might get some guys who could come in and contribute. But first rounds, if you want to get somebody who's going to come, as I say, who's going to come in and play that two corner, you really kind of want to get somebody early in the first round. And there's some really, really good players, but there is a drop off at that position.
I think Hard Knocks, if it showed us anything, is the Giants definitely had interest in quarterbacks, and they definitely had an interest in cornerbacks. So I would be very, very surprised if they're not targeting cornerback in this draft as high as the first round again. I mean, I think it's obvious, and I think the Adoree Jackson signing is pretty telling because things didn't go well the way they were hoping, so they brought him back. So I think corner is definitely. Right now, I'm looking at your list of corners on your big board, and if they're playing, I'm going to watch those games because those are the guys I'm going to keep an eye on.
And I would say, I mean, to me, it is a position, especially if I'm looking at a quarterback, that I would be really looking at the free agents next year. I don't know what the free agent market at that position is going to be like. Who knows what the salary cap situation is, but that would be a position that I would be looking at as a cornerback. Bring in somebody who knows how to play the position, and use your other, use that pick on other quarterback, maybe a defensive lineman, something like that. Also a really, really good year, by the way, at edge rusher. I think the Giants are pretty solid there right now, but I believe it was somebody on the Giants, I know who it was, said you can never have enough pass rushers.
Right.
And, I mean, we won 2 Super Bowls in 7-11. And we had the NASCAR pass rush there with tucked in Strahan and JPP and OC and Kiwanuka. The more pass rushers you have, the better. It is a really good year for people at that position. So I certainly.
And quite frankly, we don't have a lot. We have really great on the starting team, and then a big question mark behind them.
Yeah. I mean, Aguilera has shown some stuff in the past. He's pretty quiet in the preseason here. But certainly he has some potential there. But yeah, I mean, there is a big drop off to the next group, and again, it is a position you can't have too many guys. Plus one of the things I've been saying is that particularly with wide receivers, particularly with your pass rushers. If you get good ones, they're going to be expensive as hell to replace. And I have no problem at all with, overdrafting at those positions or having a few extra guys such that when somebody moves on, you've got somebody ready to step in and pick up the slack there, kind of a thing. It's kind of what San Francisco does at both positions. I think they're the best example of it, but there's certainly positions you can overdraft at.
Overall, I mean, it's again unbelievably early. Is this 25 grouping of players equivalent to 24, better than 24, or there might be some really top heavy in a couple, but then it gets to be more middling in others? I know it's early, but just kind of the early feel on the 25 overall class that we're looking at.
Yeah, I've talked to people around the National Football League, and they feel like it maybe isn't quite as good as last year. When I do my boards and stuff like that, I'm thinking, wow, it's pretty good position, and particularly at the important positions, the skill positions. It's pretty close. I don't think you have quite, as you said, the talent level at quarterback, and that's a big deal. But the top 10, 15 is really talented. And you go deep at a number of positions. I haven't mentioned it, but it's a really, really good year at running back.
That's good to know too.
The Giants decide, maybe Devin Singletary is, they want somebody a little bit better. You can get somebody in the second, third round. It's a very talented position in this year's draft. And the positions that are weak, safety, the interior offensive line, and tight end, really aren't the kind of impact positions. So there is a lot of talent at those at the positions the Giants are going to be looking at. And there's pretty good depth at a lot of positions too. I know when we did a top 100. I haven't posted it yet. I haven't posted it for a while, but you get into the past 100, and I said, "Wow, this guy's still here," and you keep saying that. So it's going to be an interesting year. Yeah.
So before a couple things, maybe give folks an idea of like how you do, your updates and when you're going to do different things throughout the year so that folks know on GBN what, how it's structured. And then when you're done with that, real quick, just your thoughts on the Giants draft class from this year. They've made the team, kind of what you think of them and their potential. But let's just give folks an idea of, what they can find on GBN and when, like what your process is.
Yeah, we're just kind of play it by ear. No, we actually we've got our position rankings and our big board up. Normally we wait until the college season is a month into it, so we'll probably end of September. We're starting to see some trends happen. We'll probably tweak the positional rankings and the big board, and we try and do that literally maybe not quite once a month, but certainly it's going to be done again in December, end of the season after the college bowls and things of that nature. And then during the winter time, we're updating almost all the time. But that's pretty much the main guts of what we're doing there. Also, we had some fun with the updated draft order, which we do post after every Monday night game out it comes. It's kind of interesting just to watch where you are going around and stuff like that. But the main thing again are the rankings. It's what we do. And one of the things I would mention about how we do this, we don't, or I don't anymore. I used to have some guys working with me, but they've all kind of retired too. What I try and do with my rankings is not so much tell people how we have ranking or how I have ranked players. Obviously, we factored into it. But what I'm really trying to get at is, how does the National Football League have these guys ranked?
Yeah.
And I read and listen and hear and I know some people around the league and get to talk to them. And so that's really kind of what we're trying to do here, because that's presumably the way they're going to be drafted, kind of a thing. And of course, do mock drafts, try and have one of those kind of once a month. I've never quite understood why people, get so excited about mock drafts. And especially this time of the year, they say, I mean, just, you look at it and, who's going to be available around you. And I mean, even now, if I do a mock draft and have the Giants drafting somebody, I'll get dozens of, that's crazy. Why would you take that guy? Well, if you don't want to take that guy, take somebody else. That's kind of what they're there. But for some reason, it's almost like, particularly as you get near the draft, people are looking at mock drafts almost like practicing for the real thing, kind of a thing. Boy, I'd really like that mock draft. Well, the likelihood that that's going to be the actual draft, and people say, oh, GBN thinks the Giants are going to take so and so. I have no idea who the Giants are going to take, but given this mock draft, one of the things with mock drafts, I don't need to do whatever is, but teams do them. But they will do dozens. Okay, what happens if the quarterbacks go
right?
What happens if the quarterbacks don't go early, et cetera, so that you can sort of plan for every scenario. And when I do one, usually we have an assumption along those lines and do it that way. But anyway, things we do is it's really kind of there's no annual schedule kind of a thing. We try and just keep keep, and as we go, as things happen, players get injured, we'll make an adjustment at that point in time. New players evolve and stuff like that. So it's pretty ongoing.
And it's good. I'll say I'll cover for you, or I'll change what you said. You used the word excitement. You mean people are crazy who, if you're upset in September, who somebody mocked for your team in April, you might need some other things to do. I'm just saying that maybe you're taking it a little too serious. It's not like the Giants came out and said, we're taking this guy next April. It's a mock draft based on a million different variables that could change between now and then. People get really mad at for having an opinion different than what they wanted. It
Yes.
drives me nuts. But so what are your thoughts on the Giants draft class then, real quick, on who they ended up getting and kind of where they are? That they made the team. We've got a seems to be a solid class. We'll see where that goes, but at least we didn't come out of training camp going, well, a couple of these guys we had to just let them go. They just weren't working out.
Well, personally, I was thrilled with Neighbors. I know when the pick was made, I'm kind of thinking, I think they're going to take a quarterback. I think they're going to take a quarterback, but and when they took it, again, I think he's a really potentially special player. I was okay with Newman. He's an interesting player. Mason Smith, the defensive tackle from LSU, was there. He actually went the next pick to the Giants. And I was, if it'd been me, I kind of might have gone that way. But Newman is again, he's an interesting player. He's a real ball hawking safety, which we don't have with the guys who are left over. And he's I think, going to be a factor in coverage. I really like Phillips, the third rounder. Really like Theo Johnson, not just because he's a Canadian, but really nice pick there. The later on guys. Who do we take? Oh, Tracy
Yeah.
Interesting kid. I hope he's healthy. I mean, he's a kid who played wide receiver for a number of years. I'm not a big fan of drafting running backs unless they can catch passes, and he can certainly do that. So hopefully he gets healthy. And Masao is by the time you get to the 6th round, I'm not worrying about it. I'm a little surprised they didn't take a quarterback at some point in there, but as I say, I think there was a bit of a strategy there, and we'll see how it goes forward. But on balance, again, we'll have to see how it evolves down the road. But I thought that was a really, really good draft, and factor in they get Brian Burns with a 2nd rounder.
Right.
I thought they had one of the best drafts in the league, and certainly in terms of adding impact players, I don't think anybody in the league added impact players as good as the Giants did. Maybe the Bears with Oduns and Caleb Williams with in the top 10, but I think other than that, the Giants did really, really well. But again, you have to wait and see what happens. With our luck, we drafted 2 terrific players the last decade, Odell and Saquon, and had those guys been healthy this year, I think we would have had quite a bit of a different story, but they both got hurt, and what can you do? You move on, and so hopefully these guys are healthy and play to their ability, and it certainly looks on paper at this point in time like a really nice draft.
Nice. Well, I don't want to put you on the spot, but we've been talking about doing a season preview, and Eric doesn't even know yet, but basically we're going to give our own predictions on what we think the Giants are going to do.
That's like a mock draft to me.
It is. It's just it's for fun. It's just for fun, but just out of curiosity, if you want to play, what are your thoughts on where do you see the Giants ending up kind of win wise this year? Maybe if you want to go on a limb.
Well, I'm with Eric in one regard. There was an old hockey coach up here back in the 1950s. He'd been asked how his team was going to do in the playoffs. He'd say, and he was French, so I can't mimic that. But predictions are for gypsies, he would say, and I kind of think that because who knows. The problem with the Giants is it so much depends on how much Daniel Jones plays. If Daniel Jones can play most of the year, I really think this team can win 9-10 games. If he's hurt, it's going to be a struggle. But as I say, I think this is they're being really, really devalued in terms of the talent they have
Right.
at this point in time. And so, life gives you a lemon, make lemonade. People aren't going to see us coming right away, and take advantage of that. And I think you're a little bit away from contending for the next level. But as I say, you're starting to add some impact players, and I'm looking forward to seeing those guys play. But I think it's going to be a good team if Daniel Jones can stay healthy. And obviously that's a big if, but we'll see how it goes.
Do you anything you want to wrap up here, Eric, before we
Yeah,
call
yeah.
it a close?
The most important question is that an Ahmad Bradshaw jersey?
At 44, yes. No,
Yes.
we were talking about this before. This is it is actually a Grumpy Lindsay uniform. I actually played football in high school. I was like a pretty good player actually, and I was number 44.
And
And
you averaged
Oh, there you go.
8.1 yards per carry.
I did, and that was on fields where I played up here in Canada. I think my high school may have been the most northernmost high school in the world that played football. We played on First World War battlefields by the middle of
Wow.
mud. So I was all very proud of that 8.1 yards per carry because I was fast, but it was hard to run in mud.
Yeah.
But yes, in fact, I'd forgotten about Ahmad. We were saying before, Kotar, Doug Kotar, was one of my favorite players in the 1970s, and he was, of course, was 44 too. So, but yeah, no, it's me and me alone. So.
What I found is interesting is the ex running back has devalued running backs. So that's my takeaway. You just said you untrapped running backs. So.
Well, I want to, before people jump on me and say, well, obviously you didn't like the Saquon pick. I love the Saquon pick because he was, again, it wasn't a running back. He was a special player. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for him, and hopefully breaks his foot or something like that before
we don't really want it to work out in Philly either.
I don't want to work out there. But yeah, it's a position. I was talking to a friend the other day. I mean, the whole deal with running backs is that no matter how good your running back is, even the best ones only average about 5 yards a carry. And the worst quarterbacks in the league average about 7 yards every time they pass the ball. The thing when you get a running back, you say, well, we got to run this guy, means you're running plays that are averaging 5 yards a carry and not doing plays that are 7 yards a play, even with a bad quarterback. So I'm not, as I said, being an old running back pains me, but the running game really isn't all that important that much anymore in the National Football. If you can do it, great. Problem is you're making 5 yards to carry when then you're not throwing the ball. But that probably for another day.
Yeah.
Well, I think I think we've covered quite a bit. So for folks who are watching, you're going to check the description. I'm going to have links to GBN report. Obviously, there'll be links to Big Blue Interactive as always. But if you can't find it, go to GBN report. I'm going to link the big board as well, so that there will be separate links for different things, so you'll be able to find it. And Colin, I'm sure we will definitely be talking again and having you on throughout as much as you want to come on, and we'll keep up as we go along, both about the Giants, but also about the upcoming draft in general, because we all know that once gets late in the season, especially if the team is struggling, draft becomes unbelievably interesting and important to the fan base. And who knows? I mean, it could be.
Yeah, absolutely. I was telling a friend, he said, oh my God, we're going to struggle this year. And I said, you know what? Even if we're 2-15, that's a hell of a lot better than no football at all.
Right.
You make the best with it, and the great thing about the draft is, yeah, if you're struggling, you can start thinking about that. But I'm sure Eric feels the same way. It's a whole heck of a lot more fun waking up on Monday mornings when you've won.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Lost. And, what I mean, just even watching the games, you start watching the other teams play, and where are we in the standings? Where when you're not winning, it is kind of depressing.
It wears on.
It wears on you after a while.
But I will say this: Colin is the first Giants fan I've ever met who said he enjoyed the 1970s.
Oh, I didn't enjoy it, but I don't remember it as being terrible. I remember just,
Yeah.
okay, well, what, just always working through. Okay, well, what's,
Well,
who we gonna
when
draft?
you were into the draft too, that's when you started following.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was really following all that sort of stuff. So I don't remember it as being terrible, but anyway, it sure is more fun. Let's put it this way: the 1980s was one heck of a lot better.
Well, not better.
Yeah.
than the
Yes.
1970s.
Exactly.
So and the last thing I'm going to say is, again, I'll talk to John about this. I think it would be fun to do a show still just to look back at old drafts. I think
Sure.
that'd be fun. I think that'd be fun.
Anytime, yeah. What are you guys doing tomorrow?
We do have something tomorrow, but
Yeah.
we're still going to hold it behind. But for those, it's actually a big thing. So we will, fingers crossed that it gets done. But
it is fun. I really enjoy doing it. Nothing more,
Oh, yeah.
nothing I like doing more than talking Giants football. Give me a call anytime. And
Thanks, Colin.
awesome. It's been a nice little reunion. The three of us did this along. We were talking about it before. It was 15 years ago when we did this as the three of us. We did a couple because you came on a couple of different times, and then we did stuff afterwards. We did draft stuff and things. So yeah, it's been a while, but I appreciate you coming on, Colin. And for everybody who's watching, make sure you like, subscribe. I know I hate to do those things, but it really does help us out. And we will see you again on Inside BBI with John and Eric. Thanks for watching.
take care, guys. Enjoy the season.